Hey guys, tonight we're wandering straight into the noise, smells and sheer absurdity of a medieval fair. Imagine yourself stepping through the rough wooden gates of a bustling town square. The air already thick with roasted meat, spilled ale, and the pungent tang of animals, who did not exactly sign up to be part of the spectacle. Jugglers are tossing knives dangerously close to your face. A toothless fiddler saws away at something that technically counts as music, and children dart underfoot chasing geese as if that's a sanctioned activity. You're swept along in the current of humanity, elbow to elbow with farmers, craftsmen, and maybe a pickpocket or two who really ought to get Employee of the Month for persistence. You catch the faint odor of sweaty wool mingling with honey cakes, and it's both nauseating and oddly appetizing. Honestly, you wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without either buying something strange or getting robbed. Probably both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hear the booming voice of a crier, shouting about the latest miracle tonic that will definitely cure gout, plague, heartbreak, and possibly your cow's bad attitude. A small stage has been erected out of planks, sagging just enough to make you wonder how many more dances it can take before someone plunges into the mud below. Performers move through the crowd, their hats jingling with little bells, their painted faces more terrifying than charming. The entire atmosphere is one long attempt to distract people from how cold, hungry or bored they usually were. You step past a booth where a man offers to let you wrestle a chained bear for a handful of coins, an opportunity you politely decline, because frankly you'd like to keep your face where it currently resides. At another corner, there's a game of chance involving a spinning wheel painted with crude symbols. You watch a hopeful peasant lay down his last copper, the wheel clattering around until it lands on a skull. The crowd groans and the man shrugs with the kind of weary resignation that says, "Yeah, I should have bought bread instead." Gambling wasn't just a pastime here. It was basically a form of medieval crowdfunding, where the only guaranteed winner was the guy running the booth. You keep walking, the dirt crunching under your boots, and you notice something unusual. A tight circle of people surrounding what looks like a makeshift stage. A storyteller stands at the center, his voice carrying even above the din. He's spinning a tale about knights, dragons, and the kind of romance that would make a soap opera blush. Everyone leans in, hanging on his words, because in a world without Netflix, this is primetime drama. A little boy next to you gasps when the hero slays the beast, then immediately sneezes directly onto your sleeve, which is exactly the sort of medieval souvenir you didn't want. One of the strangest things about these fairs was their ability to mash together the sacred and the profane. A wandering monk might be loudly condemning gambling just 2 stalls away from a dice game, while sellers hawk relics that are almost certainly fake. Guaranteed genuine splinter of the true cross, the vendor swears, though you can see he has an entire crate of them. If that many splinters existed, the cross would have been the size of a cathedral. Historians still argue over whether these relics were believed with genuine faith or treated more like medieval merch. But either way, business was booming. The fair also served as a matchmaking service, though in the least romantic way imaginable. Parents eyed potential spouses for their children like they were shopping for livestock, checking teeth, hands, and dowry potential. You overhear one mother whispering about the strong shoulders of a blacksmith's apprentice, while her daughter looks like she'd rather run away with the juggling troupe than marry him. It's love, medieval edition. Half practicality, half coercion, 0 roses. As you wander further, a group of traveling musicians catches your attention. They're playing shawms. Imagine a recorder that screams at you like a duck possessed. The melody is chaotic, but the rhythm is infectious. People clap along, dancing in the mud with a carefree abandon that ignores both hygiene and the fact that someone just lost a shoe to the muck. You can't help but smile, because in this world where war, disease, and famine were daily guests, these chaotic bursts of joy were a lifeline. And then there's the food. Oh, the food. Stalls groan under roasted meats dripping with fat, skewers of eels that look disturbingly alive, pies stuffed with questionable fillings, and honey cakes so sweet they make your teeth ache just looking at them. You take a bite of something that might be sausage, though its texture suggests the chef used parts of the animal that should remain nameless. Still, it's warm, it's filling, and it beats gnawing on stale bread. The medieval stomach wasn't picky. It was just happy to have anything. But fairs weren't just for fun. They were business, serious business. Deals were struck, taxes were collected, and disputes were settled, sometimes with fists. You pass a tent where a money changer counts coins with suspiciously quick fingers, and another where a scribe offers to write letters for the illiterate. The fairground was the medieval version of LinkedIn, networking but with more mud and fewer suits. What makes you chuckle, though, is realizing how familiar it all feels. Swap the bear baiting for bumper cars. Replace the relic stalls with phone cases, and suddenly you're at your local fairground. The medieval world may have been harsher, but the desire for noise, spectacle, and the chance to lose your money in a stupid game, that, my friend, hasn't changed one bit. So as the fair's torches crackle into the evening and the crowd swells with drunken laughter, you find yourself both exhausted and oddly exhilarated. This chaotic swirl of sound and smell, danger and delight, was the beating heart of medieval entertainment. And as you finally edge away from the press of bodies, you realize you've just survived your first medieval fair, and that in itself is an achievement worth bragging about, assuming you still have your purse. The fair still lingers in your senses. The clamor of bells, the squawk of chickens stolen by grubby children, the strange taste of honey cake mixed with ale. But now the scene shifts. You've stumbled inside the great hall of a lord's castle, and suddenly the chaos of the marketplace looks like amateur hour, compared to what counts as entertainment at a medieval feast. The air here is thick with the smell of roasting meats and wood smoke, cut with the sweet tang of spiced wine. Torchlight flickers across tapestries that depict battles no one in this room actually fought in, while long trestle tables sag under trenchers of bread, pies, and meats glistening with fat. You're squeezed onto a bench between a squire who hasn't bathed in a month and a merchant already 3 cups too deep. And you can feel the warmth of a fire so big it could roast an ox. And, in fact, probably is. The feast isn't just dinner. It's dinner theatre before dinner theatre existed. Minstrels stroll between the benches, plucking at lutes and harps, their songs praising the Lord who paid their wages. You hear lyrics about valor and piety, though it's hard to take them seriously when the rhyme scheme is wobblier than the drunk across the table. A jester capers near the high table, jingling with bells, pulling exaggerated faces that toe the line between hilarious and unsettling. He pauses to balance a trencher on his head, then promptly drops it into someone's lap. The hall erupts in laughter, not because it was funny, but because everyone desperately wants to laugh at something after weeks of boredom and back-breaking work. And then the food comes in waves. A peacock roasted whole, feathers reattached and gilded with gold leaf, parades down the center aisle, borne aloft like a holy relic of gluttony. A pie is cut open, and live birds flutter out, yes, really, and you instinctively duck as a panicked pigeon flaps dangerously close to your face. This isn't just eating, it's spectacle. A medieval version of a food show where the dishes are equal parts nutrition and performance art. Historians still scratch their heads at how much was real showmanship and how much was sheer exaggeration. But one thing's certain, subtlety wasn't on the menu. You glance up at the dais, where the lord and lady preside from their elevated seats. Their trenchers gleam with the best cuts of meat and the choicest wine. Everyone else down the line eats whatever is left. A neat little reminder that hierarchy is best served hot. The servants scurry with pitchers of ale, dodging elbows and drunken slaps, while the dogs underfoot grow bolder, snapping at bones tossed casually to the floor. The noise builds into a roar, a chorus of slurps, gulps, laughter, and the occasional burp so thunderous it deserves its own minstrel ballad. Then come the entertainments that make you raise an eyebrow. Jugglers twirl flaming torches dangerously close to the low-hung rafters. A dancing bear, dragged in on a chain, lumbers around the hall to raucous applause, the cruelty of its training invisible to eyes dulled by drink. You find yourself clapping along, not entirely sure if it's enthusiasm or peer pressure. The line between awe and horror is a thin one here, blurred by candlelight and spiced wine. What really catches you off guard is the sudden hush when a troupe of troubadours enters, their harmonies weaving tales of distant lands and courtly love. The songs are haunting, filled with longing and tragedy, and you almost forget you're wedged between a half-eaten pie and a puddle of spilled ale. Yet even here, the line between sacred and profane is crossed in a heartbeat. The next performer is a bawdy storyteller. his tales littered with innuendo that sends the hall into raucous laughter. It's the medieval equivalent of stand-up comedy, and you can't help but chuckle. Even if the punchlines are 1,000 years old, the longer you sit, the more you realize the feast is less about food and more about power. Every toast, every song, every performance is angled toward reinforcing the Lord's authority. Even the act of distributing leftovers is political. The wealthy guests might leave with gifts of food wrapped in cloth, while the poor cling to scraps tossed their way. The hierarchy is woven into every gesture, and you can feel it pressing down on you like the smoky air of the hall. Still, the sensory detail overwhelms you. The heat of the fire makes your cheeks flush, the sweetness of mead coats your tongue, and the laughter feels contagious even if you're not entirely sure what you're laughing at anymore. For a moment you forget the mud, the cold, and the endless toil of medieval life. Here, beneath banners that flap lazily in the smoky draught, you're swept into a dream of abundance, illusory, fleeting, but intoxicating all the same. As the night deepens, the wine flows faster, and the jester grows bolder. He imitates the Lord's walk, teetering dramatically until the hall gasps in scandal, only to burst into relieved laughter when the Lord himself chuckles. Power, after all, allows for mockery as long as it's flattering. You watch as guests slump against the table, their laughter turning to snores, their trenchers abandoned to the dogs. The feast has devoured them as surely as they devoured the food, and just when you think it's over, a final performance begins. A fire eater steps forward, his face illuminated by the flickering torch, and inhales flame with a calmness that makes your skin prickle. The hall falls silent, awed. The only sound the crackle of fire and the faint hiss as he exhales smoke like a dragon. For one heartbeat, you too are caught in the magic, suspended in that fragile space where danger and wonder coexist. Then, just as quickly, the moment passes. The guests slump further, the servants clean up the wreckage, and you realize you've witnessed the medieval feast, equal parts pageantry, politics, and absurdity. It's a world where food was theatre, drink was currency, and entertainment was a reminder that life, however brutal, still had room for spectacle. The smoky echoes of the feast still ring in your ears when you step outside and find yourself blinking in the glare of daylight. The air is fresher now, tinged with the scents of trampled grass, horse sweat, and the faint acrid tang of metal. Before you stretches a wide field, just beyond the castle walls, and already the crowd is gathering, buzzing with anticipation. This is no simple diversion. You've stumbled into the medieval tournament, a spectacle equal parts sport, theatre, and controlled chaos. And by controlled, I mean chaos with slightly better seating. The stands are packed with nobles in russet, saffron, and deep indigo, their cloaks trimmed with fur that catches the sunlight. Peasants jostle at the edges of the field, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the action. Merchants hawk roasted chestnuts and cheap trinkets that definitely look better before you hand over your coin. Children scramble underfoot, their sticky fingers leaving trails of honey cake across the rough wooden benches. The whole place smells like an outdoor fair collided with an armory, and frankly, it kind of did. You hear the herald's trumpet first, a brassy, slightly off-key blare that somehow still manages to silence the crowd. The knights emerge, gleaming in armor polished so bright you half expect it to blind someone in the front row. Their squires trail behind, adjusting straps and carrying shields emblazoned with painted symbols. Lions, eagles, stars, and a few you're pretty sure were improvised at the last minute. One knight's crest looks suspiciously like a duck. You wonder if that's intimidation by absurdity or just poor artistic skills. The joust begins. The lances are lowered, horses charge, and the sound when they collide is nothing short of thunderous. Splinters fly, horses rear, and the crowd roars as a knight crashes to the ground with all the grace of a dropped sack of turnips. His squire rushes to help, and you can't help but think of how many helmets were dented before someone invented modern medical insurance. These men aren't just fighting for sport. They're fighting for honor, reputation, and the bragging rights that fuel gossip at every court from here to Burgundy. But jousts were only part of the show. Between matches, you see mock battles called melees unfold across the field. The clang of armor fades into a distant echo as you wander away from the dusty lists of the tournament, following the low murmur of voices and the smell of damp parchment. Tucked within the quieter cloisters of castle life, you stumble upon a different kind of spectacle, one not of lances and splinters, but of words and wagers. It's a medieval tavern-style poetry contest. though here it's housed in the echoing hall of a guild, or maybe even under a canopy in the market square. Picture it. Benches lined with merchants, apprentices and travelling minstrels, all leaning forward as a bard in a saffron tunic clears his throat and begins to recite verses. His words are not lofty hymns, but playful jabs at rivals, cheeky rhymes that dance between clever wit and thinly veiled insults. The crowd erupts in laughter, tankards sloshing with ale as his opponent, a wiry young man in indigo with a lute strapped over his back, steps forward to answer the challenge. His reply is sharp, rhymed and just biting enough to make a widow in the front row fan herself dramatically, pretending to swoon. You can feel the electricity in the room. No one is swinging swords here, but reputations are being sharpened like blades. These contests are as cutthroat as any joust, just with more rhyming couplets. And don't think the stakes are small. A victorious poet might walk away with free drinks for the night, a purse of coins tossed from a patron's hand, or perhaps most valuable of all, whispers of their talent spreading across town. Losing, though, that meant enduring weeks of mockery, every stumble immortalized in someone else's verse. It's basically Twitter before Wi-Fi. And here's the fun twist. Many of these contests weren't entirely spontaneous. Some were staged, with poets planting friends in the crowd to cheer or boo at key moments, steering the outcome like medieval hype men. Historians still debate how much of these performances were genuine art and how much was social theatre. But the line hardly mattered to the audience. For them it was all delicious entertainment, a chance to forget the grind of daily life. You sip from a wooden cup of spiced ale as the next round begins. The words flow fast like arrows loosed in a verbal skirmish, each rhyme drawing gasps and laughter. You realize as you laugh along that this too is a battle. Less bloody but no less fierce, and in its own way, far more memorable than watching a knight fall off his horse. The echoes of rhyme and laughter trail off as you step into a new pocket of medieval amusement, one that looks less like a stage and more like a playground gone slightly off the rails. The fairground is alive with colour and chaos, a riot of wooden booths, rough canvas tents, and the unmistakable smell of roasted chestnuts mingled with something less appetizing, probably a goat tethered too close to the food stalls. Children dart between adults, their hands sticky with honey cakes, while jugglers toss knives dangerously close to the heads of passing donkeys. But your attention is caught by something stranger, a contest of strength and balance that seems halfway between sport and slapstick. Two burly men in russet tunics climb onto a greased log stretched across a shallow ditch. Each carries a sack stuffed with straw. The crowd roars as they swing at each other with the sacks, trying to knock their opponent into the mud below. The log wobbles, the men grunt, and with one mighty swing a splash sends everyone howling with delight. It's not exactly Olympic-level athletics, but it gets the job done, namely, making everyone laugh and forget how many teeth they still have left. Nearby, a fiddler saws at his instrument with manic enthusiasm, while a drummer keeps a beat on an overturned barrel. Dancers, young women in teal skirts and older men with suspiciously loose belts, spin in uneven circles, their steps more about enthusiasm than grace. A stray chicken even joins in, pecking the dirt in time with the rhythm, much to the children's delight. The whole scene feels like an impromptu music video. If the director was tipsy and the extras were paid in turnips. And here's a detail worth savoring. Medieval fairs weren't just for fun, they were networking events wrapped in chaos. Merchants struck deals while their apprentices sneaked off to play dice. Priests grumbled about sin while sneakily buying sweetmeats. Even lords occasionally showed up, both to show off their wealth and to remind everyone who was footing the bill for the festival. Historians note that fairs could reshape entire economies, but down on the ground, what people remembered most were moments like this. Mud-slicked games, bawdy songs, and the chance to flirt under lantern light without too much supervision. As the sack fight continues, you watch one particularly nimble fellow take a dive on purpose, rolling dramatically in the mud as if he's auditioning for medieval professional wrestling. The crowd loves it. The laughter bubbles up around you, warm and infectious, and for a moment you almost forget you're standing in an age where entertainment also included watching criminals in stocks. Tonight the fair belongs to joy, to music, and to the simple hilarity of a grown man falling face-first into a puddle. The music from the fair drifts away, leaving behind the faint echo of drums and laughter. When you stumble into something even stranger, an indoor entertainment that seems more serious at first glance, though it quickly reveals itself to be delightfully ridiculous. Imagine a long wooden hall lit by smoky torches, tables cleared away to create a makeshift stage, and a group of solemn-looking men gathered around what appears to be a chessboard. But this is no ordinary game of kings and pawns. This is living chess. Yes, you found yourself in the middle of one of those rare medieval spectacles, where actual people dressed as knights, bishops, and pawns take the place of carved pieces. They stand awkwardly on a painted grid across the floor, trying their best to look imposing, while clearly regretting their costume choices. One poor fellow, draped in a saffron-yellow tabard marked with a crude rook, fidgets in place, while another, dressed as a knight, looks positively giddy, holding a wooden lance that he will, at some point, use to gently capture his opponent. The crowd whispers excitedly, and the lord of the castle leans forward in his ornate chair, watching as if this is the most important military drill of the week. The players, perched on high stools at the edge, call out their moves with dramatic flair. A pawn shuffles forward stiffly, trying not to trip over his linen shoes. The opposing bishop sighs and does a sort of exaggerated shuffle to the diagonal. The audience, surprisingly, is riveted, each move greeted with murmurs of awe as though they're witnessing divine strategy unfold. To be fair, chess was viewed as a noble intellectual pastime, a game that mirrored the careful maneuvering of politics and war. But seeing it acted out in real time with real people feels more like an awkward rehearsal for a Renaissance flash mob. And here's a curious fact. Living chess wasn't pure fantasy. Records from noble households suggest that, on special occasions, pages, squires, or even servants were recruited to serve as human pieces. Some historians argue this was more about displaying wealth and authority than about the game itself. After all, only someone truly powerful could command 24 people to stand on a board for hours, moving only when ordered. Others suggest it was also a teaching tool, letting young noblemen physically grasp strategy by quite literally moving the pawns of society. The debate continues, as scholars argue whether these games were common spectacles or rare indulgences of the very wealthy. But in this hall, the mood shifts as a knight finally captures a pawn, tapping him lightly with the blunt lance. The pawn clutches his chest dramatically, staggers 3 steps, and collapses onto the rush-strewn floor like he's just been slain in battle. The crowd erupts in laughter and applause, clearly delighted by the unexpected theatre. Even the stern-faced lord cracks a smile. For a moment, the seriousness of strategy melts into comedy, and you realize that even in a world obsessed with hierarchy, there was always room for a little playful nonsense, especially if it came with the added bonus of watching your neighbor pretend to die like a tragic hero over a chess move. The echoes of the human chess match still linger as you move into another chamber where the air feels heavier, tinged with a mix of candle wax and the faint tang of sweat. Here entertainment takes a far more mystical turn. A small crowd sits in a semicircle, their faces half hidden by the flickering shadows of the torches, and in the center is a figure draped in russet robes, their hands hovering theatrically over a polished brass bowl filled with water. Welcome to a medieval evening of fortune-telling. You lower yourself onto a rough bench, and the murmurs hush as the so-called seer begins to chant. They swirl their fingers through the water, then snap back dramatically, eyes wide, as if they've just glimpsed the secrets of the universe in a ripple. The crowd gasps. One woman clutches her wooden rosary tighter. Torn between fascination and guilt, after all, the church frowned heavily upon such sorcery. Still, here she is, just as eager as everyone else to hear if her son will survive the next harvest. The fortune-teller leans forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, predicting vague futures, journeys across rivers, unexpected visitors, hidden dangers in the woods. The people drink it in, their expressions caught between fear and delight. A boy giggles when told he'll marry someone with red shoes and a stubborn streak. An older man frowns deeply when warned of dark clouds gathering in the east, which could mean anything from bad weather to an angry wife. And here's the strange part. Medieval fortune-telling wasn't just a sideshow act. Scholars point out that divination techniques, like scrying into bowls of water, casting bones, or interpreting smoke, were surprisingly widespread, even among the educated. Some argue that these practices gave communities a sense of control over an unpredictable world, while others insist it was more about performance, a kind of proto-theatre. Historians still debate whether most people truly believed these prophecies or simply enjoyed the drama of the moment. The seer suddenly raises his arms high, declaring that a great fortune shall befall the household before the next full moon. The crowd erupts in hopeful chatter, some whispering that maybe the Lord will hold another feast, others daring to imagine better harvests. You can't help but smirk. It sounds a lot like when modern horoscopes promise an unexpected opportunity will come your way, vague enough to apply to anyone, but strangely comforting. As the session ends, the seer collects small coins and loaves of bread slipped discreetly into his basket. The crowd disperses, half believers and half skeptics, all still buzzing from the promise of knowing what tomorrow might hold. And you, trailing behind, realize that entertainment in the Middle Ages didn't always come from music or games. Sometimes it came from the delicious thrill of peeking, whether real or imagined, into the unknown. You step back into the cool night air, the chants of the fortune-teller still echoing in your ears, only to be drawn toward a very different sound, laughter, raucous and unrestrained, spilling from a smoky corner of the castle yard. There, a makeshift stage has been cobbled together out of planks and barrels, and a troupe of wandering jesters is already mid-performance. Their costumes are a patchwork of saffron, teal, and russet, bells jingling at every exaggerated gesture, their painted faces frozen in grotesque smiles. You settle onto a bench as the crowd erupts at a bawdy joke, one involving a pig, a priest, and an unfortunate misunderstanding at a well. The jesters tumble across the stage, mock-fighting with sticks, pulling exaggerated grimaces and mimicking the stiff gait of the local steward to roars of approval. One woman claps so hard she nearly drops her wooden cup of ale. Children shriek with glee when a jester suddenly pretends to sneeze so violently that his hat flies into the audience. But the humor isn't just slapstick. The sharpest jokes cut close to the bone. Mocking the clergy, poking fun at the Lord's tax collectors, even hinting at the absurdities of daily life. These performances were as much social commentary as they were entertainment. Medieval jesters had a strange kind of license. They could say things no one else dared, cloaked under the guise of comedy. Scholars still debate whether their jokes were simply tolerated as comic relief, or whether they actually influenced the way people viewed authority. You notice how quickly the mood shifts. One moment the jesters are dancing clumsily, their limbs flailing like scarecrows caught in the wind. The next, they're singing a mock ballad about a knight who couldn't mount his horse without help. The audience howls because everyone knows someone exactly like that. The humor feels surprisingly modern, like the medieval equivalent of a late-night comedy roast, except with more bells and less censorship. And here's a curious fact. Some jesters doubled as newsbearers, weaving political gossip or rumors into their routines. In a world without newspapers, a quick-witted performer could deliver headlines wrapped in rhymes and riddles. Whether entirely true or wildly exaggerated didn't matter. The crowd laughed and the message spread. Historians still argue how much of medieval comedy was harmless distraction and how much was a sly mirror held up to power. As the final act crescendos, the jesters form a pyramid of tangled limbs, wobbling precariously before collapsing into a heap, bells jangling wildly as the crowd roars in delight. You find yourself laughing too, the absurdity contagious. For a brief moment, in this smoky courtyard under the torchlight, you forget the grimness of medieval life, the hunger, the toil, the endless rules, and remember that humor, no matter the century, has always been a little act of rebellion. The laughter from the jesters fades into the night, but your ears soon catch a different kind of melody, softer, lilting, almost hypnotic. You drift toward it and find a small circle of people gathered around a low fire. A man with a battered lute plucks a tune, while a woman's voice rises above the crackle of flames, telling a story not with words alone but with rhythm, song, and gesture. This is the minstrel stage, not built of planks and barrels but of memory and imagination. You sit on the edge of the circle, the glow of the fire painting the listeners' faces in gold. The minstrel's tale is half history, half fantasy, recounting the deeds of a knight who may or may not have ever existed. His armor gleams brighter in the song than it ever could in reality. His enemies are larger, fiercer, more monstrous, and his triumphs are stitched with a thread of exaggeration. The crowd leans forward transfixed, even though you suspect they've heard this story 100 times before. Familiarity is part of the comfort. The lute plays on, weaving melody with memory. You realize that for many here, this is the only history lesson they'll ever get. The chronicles locked in the scriptorium might record the tax rolls, but the minstrels give people heroes, villains, and a reason to believe their world has meaning. Historians still argue over how much of medieval history was shaped by these performers rather than scholars, because what sticks in the heart often outlasts what's written in ink. There's something oddly modern about it too. The minstrel is doing what your favorite podcast host might, telling stories in a way that makes you laugh, sigh, and lean in closer. Only instead of a microphone, he has a lute string and a well-timed wink. And when he slips in a sly jab at the local tax collector, well, the roar of laughter shows everyone caught it, even if nobody dares admit it out loud. You notice how the children edge closer to the fire, their eyes wide as saucers. An older woman hums along softly, recalling the same tune from her own youth. The song has a strange power, binding the listeners together across generations, a thread stronger than the castle's stone walls. As the last note fades, the crowd claps in rhythm, and the minstrel bows with mock solemnity. You feel a warmth that isn't just from the fire. It's from the reminder that stories, whether sung or spoken, are the true currency of every age. And here in this medieval night, the minstrel's song is both entertainment and education, a lullaby for weary hearts and a spark to keep dreams alive until dawn. The embers of the minstrel's fire fade behind you, but before long another sound pulls you onward, this one far less refined. It's the sharp crack of dice hitting a wooden board, followed by groans, cheers, and the unmistakable rustle of coins changing hands. You've stumbled into the corner of the hall where the gamblers gather. A makeshift table has been set up, lit by the weak glow of tallow candles, and men in russet and indigo tunics lean over it, like generals surveying a battlefield. The game is deceptively simple, just dice, a few carved bone counters, and wagers made in clipped, hushed voices. Yet the tension is thick enough to taste. You watch as one man cups the dice, kisses them for luck, and lets them tumble across the wood. They land badly, and his companions erupt in jeers, the kind that carry both camaraderie and cruelty. The winner scoops the coins with a grin, his eyes glinting like a magpie's. This isn't harmless fun, though. Gambling in the Middle Ages was viewed with suspicion, and often with reason. Soldiers who lost their pay might desert. Farmers might gamble away seed for planting, and sometimes fortunes could turn on the roll of a single die. Historians still debate just how widespread gambling really was, but the endless sermons railing against it suggest it was more than a passing habit. You can almost hear a priest's voice echoing, "The devil himself hides in the dice." Yet you can't help but notice the joy here too. For all the church's condemnations, dice offered something irresistible, the fantasy of control in a world that often gave you none. Work, war, plague, none of those could be tamed. But maybe, just maybe, with a good throw of the bones, fortune could finally tilt your way. You watch as another player slams down a wooden cup with dramatic flair, clearly convinced he's about to win big. He doesn't. The table erupts in laughter, and even he can't help but chuckle, though you know the loss stings. The room smells of sweat, cheap ale, and the faint tang of tallow smoke, but it feels alive, charged with risk and possibility. And then it hits you. This isn't so different from a modern slot machine or poker table. Only instead of neon lights, the illumination comes from flickering candle flames, and instead of Vegas cocktails, it's bitter ale in clay mugs. The thrill is the same, though, the heartbeat-quickening hope that you'll walk away richer, even if deep down you know the odds are never really in your favor. You step back into the shadows, the laughter and groans trailing behind you, and realize that the castle isn't just a place of defense and duty, it's also a place where human weakness and human joy spill out, as timeless as the roll of the dice. The echo of dice and laughter fades into the background, and soon you're pulled by a very different kind of sound. Thwacks, grunts, and the rhythmic smack of wood against wood. You find yourself at the edge of a small courtyard, where two men in padded jerkins and rust-colored hose are locked in a mock battle. They're sparring with wooden swords, their bodies swaying, lunging, and colliding in bursts of clumsy precision. The audience is small but eager. A few servants and soldiers crowded together, shouting advice and laughing whenever someone stumbles. This is swordplay as entertainment, not a solemn nightly tournament. It's rough, loud, and a little ridiculous. The men take exaggerated stances, swinging their wooden blades with the drama of theatre, more than the grace of trained knights. One swings wide and misses, earning a chorus of mocking boos. Another stumbles backward, nearly landing in a trough of water, and the crowd erupts in howls of laughter. You can almost feel the sting of splinters and the sweat dripping from their brows. Swordplay wasn't always about skillful combat in the Middle Ages. For many common folk, it was a pastime, a chance to imitate the knightly class they admired but could never join. And here's where historians still argue. Some say these rough-and-tumble bouts were a way to train civilians in basic defense, while others believe they were mostly rowdy entertainment, a medieval mix of slapstick and shadow boxing. Either way, it was noisy, messy fun, and nobody left without at least a bruise or two. The wooden blades themselves tell a story. They're chipped, darkened with use, some wrapped with scraps of cloth to keep them from splintering further. Unlike the gleaming longswords in a knight's arsenal, these are tools for play and practice, danger dulled but not erased. One good whack across the fingers, and you'd be nursing the injury for weeks. You wince as one fighter takes a blow square on the shoulder, yelps dramatically, then flops to the ground like he's been slain. The crowd claps and hoots, delighted by the performance. And here's the strange part. These mock battles sometimes grew into full-blown spectacles, with towns hosting swordplay competitions, where crowds placed wagers, and rowdy fans shouted themselves hoarse. What you're seeing in this courtyard is just a shadow of that larger tradition. But the spirit is the same, a mix of danger, comedy, and the ever-present human need to test boundaries. Watching the sweaty men pant and posture, you realize it's not so far from a modern boxing match or a backyard wrestling game. The humor, the bruises, the exaggerated drama, timeless. Only instead of pay-per-view, you've got chickens clucking at the edges and kids giggling in the mud. The fight ends with a final, dramatic fall, the victor raising his wooden sword high as if he's just conquered half of France. The crowd claps. Someone throws him a crust of bread as a mock prize, and the men laugh together, sore but satisfied. You step away, carrying the sound of clattering wood and raucous cheers in your ears, another echo of how medieval life found joy even in bruises. The echo of wooden swords lingers in your ears as you wander further through the castle's winding passages, only to stumble upon a much stranger kind of merriment. Here in a half-lit corner of the hall, a crowd gathers not around fighters or musicians, but around a game so absurd you can't help but blink twice. A group of peasants, their tunics patched and stained, are trying to balance themselves on greased logs laid across a shallow trough of water. They wobble, wave their arms, and inevitably splash. One tumbles into the murky puddle while the others howl with laughter. It's a spectacle of clumsiness, the medieval equivalent of slapstick comedy. The aim isn't to win with skill, but to endure the humiliation of falling the least. Mud and water mix into slimy patches, and the losers emerge soaked, dripping and grinning sheepishly. You catch the smell. Stale water, damp wool, and the faint reek of cabbage stew still clinging to their clothes. It's messy, chaotic, and wildly entertaining, especially for those who aren't the ones face-planting into the trough. Believe it or not, these balancing games were common forms of folk entertainment across medieval Europe. Sometimes logs were set across streams, sometimes barrels were rolled out, and the whole point was to laugh at the inevitable tumbles. And here's where historians argue again. Was it purely a silly pastime, or was it also sly practice for balance and agility, teaching young men to keep steady in battle or while working on high scaffolds? Either way, the spectacle was irresistible. One man, flushed red from ale and effort, tries to keep his footing by flailing his arms like a windmill. The crowd roars as he teeters back and forth, almost recovering, before sliding straight off into the water with a dramatic splash. The peasants cackle, a child points gleefully, and even the local steward watching from the edge can't quite hide his grin. It's the kind of comedy that needs no script. Gravity is the joke, and everyone is in on it. Of course, the losers sometimes paid in more than dignity. A bad fall on a splintered log meant bruises, cuts, or worse. Still, the game went on, because laughter was worth the risk. And here's a little-known fact. Records suggest that fairs occasionally hosted contests with small prizes for the champion who managed to stay dry the longest. Imagine winning a jug of ale for not face-planting into a puddle. That's medieval glory for you. Watching the game unfold, you feel the timeless pull of slapstick. People love to laugh at pratfalls, whether it's peasants slipping on mud, clowns tumbling in circuses, or actors in cheesy sitcoms pretending to trip over couches. The humor hasn't changed in centuries. Only the stage has. You can't help but chuckle as yet another soaked contestant crawls out of the trough, shaking water from his hair, bowing with exaggerated flair to the crowd's cheers. The log is reset. The next two challengers step up, and the cycle continues: wobble, gasp, splash, laugh. You turn away, warmed by the ridiculous joy of it all, the reminder that sometimes the best entertainment comes not from winning, but from the glorious mess of falling flat on your face. You drift away from the laughter echoing around the trough and find yourself tugged by another kind of sound. Sharper, more rhythmic, punctuated by occasional bursts of jeers and applause. The scent here shifts too, less of damp wool and mud, more of sweat, ale, and the unmistakable tang of competition. You've stumbled into a tavern-like corner of the castle, where a crowd of men hunch over crude tables, slamming down wooden pieces and muttering curses under their breath. It's a gambling den of sorts, though they wouldn't call it that. The game before you is a medieval form of dice throwing, simple in its mechanics but dangerously addictive. Each man clutches a set of bone-carved dice, their edges smoothed by countless rolls, their dots darkened with soot. A roll across the rough wood can decide a man's dinner, his boots, or even his week's wages. The rules change from village to village, but here it's clear: throw high, win the pot. Throw low and watch your last coin vanish into someone else's pouch. The tension is electric. One man rolls, the dice clatter and land snake-eyed. Groans erupt, and the victor across the table rakes in the winnings with a grin that says he knows he'll probably lose it all next round. It's entertainment, yes, but it's also peril. The church condemned dice games fiercely, calling them the devil's gateway. Priests thundered about souls being lost to chance. Yet somehow, everyone always seemed to have a pair tucked away in their pouch. And here's a quirky twist historians love to argue about. Some nobles played too, though in their gilded halls the stakes were far higher. Land, honor, even the hand of a bride could, in whispers, be tied to a roll of dice. Was it ever truly binding? Scholars still debate, but stories survive of ruined families and sudden fortunes born from the fickle tumble of bone cubes. The crowd around the table shifts as a particularly bold wager is made. A young man, flushed with overconfidence, slams down not coins but his belt knife. The others murmur, "This is a serious stake." The dice spin, hearts pound, and when they settle, the young man's face collapses into stunned silence. His knife is swept away, his pride gone with it. Laughter erupts, half mocking, half sympathetic, because everyone here knows that feeling of watching luck slip through your fingers. You feel the push and pull of the room, the giddy hope, the crushing despair, the wild swings of fortune that make gambling so intoxicating. And as another round begins, you realize the dice aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors of medieval life itself, unpredictable, risky, and often unfair, yet impossible to resist playing. You slip out before you're tempted to join in, the clatter of dice still rattling in your ears, like a reminder that chance rules more than just the games in this shadowed corner. It rules everything. You leave the smoky tavern air and follow the sound of something heavier, almost like thunder rolling indoors. The closer you get, the sharper it becomes: clang, 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 metal striking wood, punctuated by grunts and shouts of encouragement. You step into a courtyard lit by torches, and here the spectacle is less about chance and more about spectacle, the medieval jousting practice. Though pared down from the grand tournaments, is still a sight to behold, and two men on foot, armored in mismatched bits of plate and padded gambeson, face off with long wooden poles. Not the deadly lances of the lists, but practice staves, long, scarred and splintered. They charge at each other across a narrow strip, swinging with a ferocity that makes the crowd of squires and stable boys cheer like it's the final of some grand championship. You can't help but think of a medieval version of a wrestling match, except with far more bruises and the occasional broken rib. This isn't noble play acting. It's brutal training dressed up as entertainment. Spectators wager quietly on who will last the longest, slipping small coins from one hand to another. Every strike rattles through the wooden fence, and every stumble is met with laughter or groans. And then there's the unspoken rule. Whoever loses must buy the first round of ale at the tavern later, which means sometimes a fighter falls suspiciously quickly, depending on how thirsty he is. Here's the strange historical wrinkle. Tournaments were deadly serious for knights, but the mock jousts in castles and villages became popular pastimes for the masses. Sometimes they fought on horseback with wooden shields, sometimes on foot like here, armed with blunted swords or poles. It was entertainment and exercise rolled into one. But chroniclers note with bemusement that injuries were rampant and deaths were not uncommon. Imagine paying a penny to watch your neighbor trip, get whacked, and limp off with a cracked collarbone. It was considered a good evening out. The torches flicker as one man lunges, his stave striking the other square in the chest. The loser stumbles, collapses into the mud, and the crowd erupts into jeers and applause. Someone tosses him a cup of ale as consolation, which he drinks while still flat on his back. You catch the glimmer of pride in his opponent's eyes, though it's the kind of pride that knows tomorrow he'll be the one face down in the dirt. The spectacle feels raw, dangerous, and absurdly human. You can almost hear echoes of a modern-day sports commentator narrating the blow-by-blow, except instead of instant replays, you just get more shouting and mud. And as you turn away, the ringing clang still vibrating in your bones, you realize that even in a fortress of stone and steel, people needed games, risky, painful, and ridiculous though they might be. The metallic clatter of mock jousts drifts behind you, replaced by something far less violent but no less competitive, a cascade of laughter, shuffling feet, and the hollow clack of dice cups against wood. You follow the sound into a long hall where benches have been pushed together, and a group of men-at-arms huddle around a table, their faces lit by flickering candlelight. This is medieval gambling, the castle's quieter but no less dangerous form of entertainment. Wooden dice tumble across the table, carved unevenly so that luck and superstition blur together. Coins clink softly, wagers whispered like secrets in a smoky room. One man smirks as he sweeps a small pile of copper pennies toward himself, while his opponent slams a fist onto the table so hard that the candles wobble. The air smells of tallow, sweat, and the faint sour tang of spilled ale. You lean closer, hearing muttered prayers, half to God, half to Lady Luck. As the dice roll again, the humor here isn't lost on you. Men who just risked cracked ribs at the jousting ring are now risking their week's pay on little cubes of bone. A soldier groans as the dice betray him, while another bursts into triumphant laughter so loud it makes the serving girl jump. It feels like poker night in someone's garage, except with fewer snacks and more threats of stabbing if someone's caught cheating. And here's a curious historical fact. Gambling was technically forbidden by church law, but it never truly stopped. Kings and bishops railed against it, issuing decrees and punishments. Yet dice games flourished in castles, inns, and even monasteries. Archaeologists still unearth small bone dice from castle middens, sometimes carved so crudely they look more like children's toys. The irony. Those little cubes decided who owed who a pint of ale, or sometimes who walked home without their boots. As the game heats up, a soldier suddenly claims his dice are cursed, demanding a swap. The others laugh but agree. It's easier than starting a brawl. You watch as he rolls the new set, only to groan louder when they betray him again. The crowd howls with laughter, pounding the table so hard it seems the whole hall shakes. Coins exchange hands, pride deflates, and reputations grow sharper with every throw. The candles sputter, shadows lengthen, and you realize this game is as much about the company as the winnings. In a world of hard labor, strict rules, and constant fear, a few dice and some laughter might be the only release they have. And as you step back into the corridor, the echoes of those dice clattering on wood seem to follow you. Proof that even in the Middle Ages, people were willing to gamble everything for a moment of thrill. The echoes of dice and laughter fade as you follow another sound. Lighter, sharper, almost like the chirping of 100 wooden birds. You round a corner and discover a courtyard strung with simple wooden platforms, where musicians pluck, strum, and tap away at instruments that look both familiar and strange. This is where music lives in the castle, though not the solemn chants of the chapel. No, this is rowdy, earthy entertainment, the kind that makes feet shuffle and shoulders sway. A young man plucks at a lute, its pear-shaped body gleaming under the torchlight, while another beats a small drum, the rhythm rattling in your chest. A woman in a russet gown shakes a tambourine, her bracelets jingling in counterpoint. The air smells of wood smoke and roasting onions, and the music cuts through the night like a sudden burst of warmth. You can't help but smile. It's halfway between a folk jam session and your neighbor's garage band warming up, except with fewer electric guitars and a lot more goats wandering through. And here's a strange note from history. Some of these instruments were imported luxuries. The lute itself came from the Middle East, its very name echoing from the Arabic al-ud. Bagpipes, despite their jokes about Scottish origins, were common across Europe and could be heard in towns from France to Poland. Minstrels carried melodies between courts, spreading not just songs but gossip and news. In fact, some rulers feared their influence, banning wandering performers as potential spies or rabble-rousers. The humor of the moment isn't lost on you. One knight, still in padded armor, tries to clap along but keeps missing the beat, his gauntlets clanging like pots falling in a kitchen. The crowd roars with laughter, and someone hands him a wooden spoon to bang on a bucket. He accepts with mock seriousness, adding chaotic percussion that somehow makes the tune better. But beneath the laughter lies power. Music wasn't just for fun, it taught, persuaded, and remembered. A biting satire in song could ruin a noble's reputation faster than a lost battle. Ballads preserved legends of kings and heroes long after ink faded. Even love songs carried hidden politics, flattering one lord while mocking another. Historians note that what survived in song often tells us more about medieval hopes and fears than the official records do. You linger, listening as the tune shifts from a stomping rhythm to a lilting melody that feels like a lullaby. The crowd softens, voices humming along, faces glowing in the torchlight. It's a moment of unity, a reminder that even in a world divided by class, faith, and fear, a simple song could draw everyone together, just as it does for you now, swaying gently in the night air. The music fades into the night, but another sound picks up in its place. Laughter mixed with mock outrage, punctuated by the clatter of wooden swords. You follow it to a patch of packed earth near the outer wall, where a troop of jesters and fools have gathered an eager crowd. Their costumes are a riot of saffron and teal, with bells stitched into their hoods that jingle every time they bow, tumble, or leap into a pratfall. The air is heavy with the smell of spilled ale, the tang of sweat, and the faint sweetness of straw scattered to soften their tumbles. One fool balances precariously on a barrel, waving a wooden spoon like a knight's lance. Another pretends to be a stern priest, lecturing the crowd before tripping over his own robes and collapsing in an exaggerated heap. The people howl with laughter, not the polite chuckles of a noble's hall, but belly-deep cackles that echo off the stone. You catch yourself smiling too. After all, who doesn't enjoy a man tumbling headfirst into a bucket? It's like the medieval version of slapstick YouTube compilations, minus the ads and the comments section full of trolls. And here's the curious twist. Fools weren't just comic relief. They often enjoyed unusual freedom of speech, allowed to poke fun at nobles, kings, and priests in ways no one else dared. A fool's sharp tongue could say what others only whispered, cloaking hard truths in absurdity. Some historians argue that the fool's role was a kind of safety valve for society, letting people laugh at the very systems that oppressed them. Others say it was more dangerous, that a clever fool could plant ideas that simmered into rebellion. You notice how the crowd reacts. A servant girl laughs at a parody of the steward, her hands covering her mouth as though she's afraid she'll be caught. A grizzled soldier wheezes with laughter at a bawdy joke that involves a chicken, a knight, and far too much ale. Even a stern knight at the edge of the crowd cracks a reluctant grin. Shaking his head as though he disapproves but can't resist, the jesters leap, tumble, and bow, turning somersaults that kick up dust and send bells jingling like tiny church chimes. The show ends with one fool standing on the shoulders of another, raising his wooden spoon lance as if claiming victory. The crowd cheers, tossing scraps of bread and even a coin or two at their feet. For a moment you realize these fools are kings. Their stage a patch of dirt, their crown the laughter of everyone watching. You turn away still smiling, the echoes of laughter following you like a tune. In a world where fear and duty weigh heavy, foolishness feels like a kind of freedom. A reminder that sometimes survival requires the courage to laugh at everything, even yourself. The laughter of fools drifts behind you, fading into the night air, replaced by a strange rhythmic clicking. that makes you think of beetles tapping their wings. You follow the sound to a broad wooden board set up in the bailey, lit by torches. Around it, men huddle in tight circles, their faces tense and eyes gleaming in the flicker of firelight. This is the castle's gambling corner, where fortunes rise and fall not with the swing of a sword, but with the roll of dice and the shuffle of carved wooden tokens. You step closer and see crude dice fashioned from bone, their edges worn smooth by countless hands. A pair clatters across the board, bouncing once before settling into a triumphant double six. The winner cackles, sweeping in a small pile of coins and tokens, while the losers groan and curse their luck. It's raw, desperate energy, the kind you might see today in a dingy late-night casino, but here the stakes are a little more immediate. A man might gamble away his boots, his cloak, even tomorrow's dinner portion. And yes, some chroniclers note men even lost their horses or weapons at dice. Talk about a bad bet when your next battle is around the corner. One player slams down a cup, rattling the dice inside before spilling them out across the board with a flourish. Another clutches a small wooden charm in one hand, muttering a quick prayer under his breath. You can almost smell the tension, sweaty palms, cheap ale on their breath, and the faint scorch of the torches above. For all their bravado, you can see the hunger in their eyes. This isn't just about winning coins. It's about snatching a tiny victory from a world that doesn't give many. Here's the curious fact. Dice games were so common in the Middle Ages that authorities often tried to ban them. Worried soldiers and servants were squandering their wages and stirring trouble. But the bans never really worked. The appeal of chance, the hope that fortune might just once land in your lap, was too strong. Historians still debate whether medieval dice were fair or often weighted. Some suggest a skilled craftsman could carve them to favor certain rolls, though proving it centuries later is another matter. The crowd erupts as one man loses spectacularly, his last coin slipping into another's pile. He tears at his hair while the winner smirks, already lining up another throw. It's part sport, part theater, part quiet desperation. You can feel the thrill yourself, as though a single toss of the dice might change your fate. But as you step away, you notice something sobering. In the shadows at the edge of the torchlight, a barefoot boy watches the gamblers hungrily, clutching a ragged scrap of bread. The dice clatter again, the men laugh and curse, and the world spins on, balanced on luck as much as labor. You leave the corner with the sound of dice still in your ears, that sharp reminder that no matter how high the castle walls, chance always finds a way in. The clatter of dice fades into the distance, replaced by a sound at once sharper and more rhythmic. The slap of palms on stretched animal skin, the quick rolling beat of drums, and the bright twang of string instruments strummed with gusto. You follow it into a firelit courtyard, where a group of traveling minstrels has set up for the evening. Their cloaks are ragged, their boots worn thin, but their presence has a magnetic pull. Faces light up as they tune their fiddles, pluck their lutes, and pound on nakers, those paired kettle drums that sound like someone beating a pair of armored helmets. The crowd gathers quickly. Children push forward, their eyes wide, while servants and soldiers settle onto barrels and overturned buckets. Even a knight or two stand at the back, pretending not to care while their heads bob to the rhythm. You watch as a minstrel launches into a bawdy song about a knight who mistook his horse for a maiden in the dark, complete with winks and exaggerated gestures. Laughter erupts, the kind of laughter that bridges class and rank, if only for a moment. It feels like a medieval version of open mic night, only with fewer spotlights and a lot more fleas. One of the performers twirls suddenly, producing a set of wooden puppets from a sack, and the atmosphere shifts. The puppets dance clumsily in the firelight, their crude painted faces grinning. The story is simple but biting. A foolish lord tricked by his cunning servant. The crowd roars, half in glee, half in nervous recognition. Everyone knows the lesson is about the nobles, but here, within the veil of humor, it's safe to laugh. It's entertainment and quiet rebellion wrapped into one, and here's a curious historical tidbit. Minstrels were more than mere entertainers. They were carriers of news, blending gossip with song, embedding current events into rhyme so people remembered. Some historians argue their songs were the social media of the Middle Ages, though you couldn't scroll past one if you got bored. You had to sit, listen, and maybe toss a coin if you wanted them to stay. Others point out that their stories often stretched the truth. Did a battle really happen the way they sang it? Or was it polished up for dramatic effect? Scholars still argue whether minstrels were reliable chroniclers or simply creative liars with good rhythm. The music builds faster, louder, the beat infectious. People clap in time, feet stomping the packed dirt floor. For a moment, you forget the cold stone walls around you, the drafty chambers, the harsh realities of survival. There is only the firelight, the music, the laughter, and the shimmering possibility that life, in its rough, uneven way, can still offer joy. Then, as suddenly as it began, the song ends with a flourish. The crowd cheers, tossing a few coins and crusts of bread into the performer's basket. The minstrels bow low, grinning, their faces glowing with sweat and satisfaction. The music lingers in your ears as you walk away, a reminder that even in a fortress built for war, there is room for stories, for rhythm, and for the strange, wonderful need to be entertained. The echoes of the minstrels' laughter and drumbeats linger in your ears as you drift further into the castle grounds, where a different sort of spectacle unfolds. At first it sounds like a scuffle, the grunts and shouts of men at odds, but then you realize it's not battle but sport. A ring has been formed in the packed dirt, torches blazing to illuminate the circle, and within it 2 wrestlers are locked in combat, their bodies glistening with sweat despite the chill night air. Their tunics have been stripped down, their hands grappling for purchase, their boots sliding in the dust. Around them, a raucous crowd hollers and jeers, throwing in bets with the enthusiasm of gamblers at a horse track. You squeeze closer, catching sight of the wrestlers' straining faces. This isn't polished entertainment. It's raw, sweaty, and full of risk. A poorly placed hold could mean a broken arm or cracked ribs, but no one seems concerned. The audience thrives on the danger. The wrestlers slam into one another, each trying to lift and throw the other onto the ground with enough force to end the match. The crowd surges and groans with every near fall. You can almost feel the tension in your own bones, as though your ribs ache with each impact. And here's the twist. Wrestling wasn't just a sport, it was also training. Medieval manuals exist, complete with illustrations of men grappling in various holds, teaching knights and squires the best ways to unseat an opponent or survive in close combat. The same moves that make the crowd cheer here could be the difference between life and death in a melee. Yet historians still debate whether these bouts were genuinely serious practice or simply raucous tavern-style contests dressed up as training. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a blend of skill and spectacle. The crowd's energy spikes as one wrestler lifts his opponent clean off the ground, his back arched, muscles taut. With a heave, he slams him down onto the dirt, and the impact reverberates like a drumbeat. Dust billows, the crowd erupts, and for a brief moment it feels as though you're watching gladiators, stripped of armor, relying only on strength and technique. The loser groans, clutching his side, while the victor raises his fist high, grinning through bloodied lips. Coins exchange hands quickly. Some cheer with triumph, others curse their rotten luck. The wrestlers retreat to the edge of the circle, battered but alive, already arguing about a rematch. The entertainment is brutal, yes, but it carries a strange intimacy. The clash of human bodies reduced to the most primal test. Who can pin the other to the earth? You turn away, the noise still roaring behind you. Your body hums with the aftershock of watching such raw strength, as though your own muscles had strained in sympathy. The medieval world is many things, violent, strange, even absurd, but in moments like this, when sweat and dust collide with laughter and wagers, you realize that entertainment in these stone walls is as much about survival of the spirit as it is about spectacle. Tonight, wrestling is the heartbeat of the crowd, and it beats fast. The roar of the wrestling crowd fades into a low hum behind you, and you find yourself lured by a new, sharper rhythm, an odd mixture of squeals, snapping sticks, and bursts of laughter. You follow the sound through a narrow passage and into a torch-lit yard, where a group has gathered around what looks at first glance like chaos. But no, it's organized chaos, a boisterous game of medieval football. Forget your tidy modern soccer pitches with chalk lines and referees. This is a free-for-all played on churned mud, where the only goal seems to be survival. You watch as a crude leather ball, stuffed with animal bladder, is hurled into the crowd. Immediately, bodies crash into one another with wild abandon. There are no positions, no rules, just sheer force of will. A man in a russet tunic charges forward, cradling the ball like it's a newborn, before being tackled into the muck by 3 others. The crowd howls. A woman perched on a barrel waves her hands, shouting encouragement like she's at a prize fight. The ball squirts loose, bouncing across the ground, and instantly a scrum of shouting players piles on, each desperate to kick, grab, or drag it closer to the crude markers that count as goals. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, churned earth, and the occasional splash of ale as onlookers cheer with tankards raised high. It's violent, absurd, and completely riveting. You can't help but laugh as one unlucky fellow is shoved headfirst into a water trough, emerging sputtering and grinning, mud smeared across his face like war paint. The game pauses for no one. He's back in the fray before the water has even dripped from his hair. And here's the kicker, pun intended. These games were sometimes banned by kings and city councils. The sheer violence often resulted in broken bones, lost teeth, or worse. Chroniclers note that whole villages could get swept into these matches, turning them into sprawling brawls that stretched across fields, rivers, and even through streets. Yet despite repeated bans, people kept playing, drawn to the chaos and thrill like moths to flame. Historians still debate whether the game was more sport or thinly veiled riot. A sanctioned way to blow off steam before tensions boiled over. You step back from the shouting mass, mud flying dangerously close to your boots. The torches flicker, casting long shadows over the scene, making the players look like wild figures in some frantic dance. There's laughter and groans, triumphant shouts and curses, all blending into a single raw chorus. You find yourself smiling despite the madness. For all the dust, the bruises, the aching limbs, this is joy in its most untamed form, a community colliding in a celebration of sheer physicality. The ball, smeared in mud and who knows what, flies high into the night sky, a crude leather comet under the stars. The players crash into one another again, heedless of pain, chasing it like it's the most precious thing in the world. And for this moment it is. Entertainment here isn't polite or polished. It's muddy, it's messy, and it leaves you grinning at the lunacy of it all. You step away from the football melee, still hearing the echo of rowdy laughter and the squelch of boots in mud, and follow a softer sound, a rolling hum, punctuated by cheers, groans, and bursts of raucous applause. You round a corner into a torchlit courtyard, where long wooden tables have been hastily pushed aside, clearing a space in the center. Here men and women sit shoulder to shoulder, mugs of ale in hand, their eyes fixed on a curious competition. This isn't battle or brawl. No, this is the genteel, well, not so genteel world of medieval dice and gambling. A pair of dice, carved from bone, tumble across the tabletop with a sharp clatter, their pips flashing in the torchlight. The players lean forward, faces tight with concentration and ale-flushed excitement. One man in a saffron tunic pumps his fist as he rolls high, raking in a small pile of coins that glint dully in the firelight. His opponent, a wiry woman with russet sleeves, narrows her eyes, mutters something about bad luck and demands another throw. The crowd roars approval. There's no referee here, only the shifting tide of peer pressure and beer-soaked justice. The air is thick with smells both sweet and sour, spilled ale, sweat, the faint tang of smoke and the metallic bite of coins as they clink together in trembling hands. You can almost taste the tension, that electric charge of risk and chance. A boy too young to be here leans in, eyes wide, clearly hoping to learn the tricks of the dice. A stern-looking friar, seated a few benches back, shakes his head in disapproval but doesn't leave, because even he wants to see how it ends. And here's a curious fact. Gambling was so rampant in medieval times that kings and popes tried repeatedly to ban it. Laws were passed, sermons preached, punishments threatened. Yet the lure of chance proved too irresistible. Soldiers wagered their wages, peasants bet their last loaf of bread, and even lords were known to lose entire estates on the throw of a dice. Chroniclers complain bitterly about it, while archaeologists still find dice tucked away in unexpected places, under floorboards, in the corners of courtyards, hidden in discarded leather pouches. Historians still debate whether gambling was a dangerous vice or a harmless outlet. But the truth is it was both. A way to forget hardship and flirt with fortune, if only for a moment. The players laugh, groan, and shout over one another as the dice roll again, bouncing wildly before landing with a result that sends half the room into cheers and the other half into curses. Ale sloshes, fists pound tables, and someone starts a song that no one quite finishes, because the next throw is already underway. You step back, feeling the pull of the game, even though you carry no coins to wager. There's something hypnotic about the rattle of bone on wood, the brief silence as everyone leans in, and the explosion of sound that follows. In this flickering light, with ale on their breath and fortune in their eyes, these gamblers are not knights or peasants. Priests or outlaws, they're just dreamers, chasing chance through the spin of fate's tiny cubes. And in their laughter and groans, you hear the beating heart of another kind of medieval entertainment, one part joy, one part despair, all bound by the irresistible thrill of uncertainty. You drift away from the dice table, the echo of laughter and groans fading, as you wander toward a cluster of people gathered around something far more theatrical. At first you think it might be a heated argument, but then the voices change, rising and falling in exaggerated tones, accompanied by the slap of a drum and the thin wheeze of a pipe. You edge closer and realize you've stumbled into a medieval puppet show. Years before Netflix binges and TikTok trends, the hottest entertainment could be a pair of wooden dolls being smacked together while the crowd howled in delight. The stage is little more than a rough wooden booth, painted in bright but flaking colors, its roof covered with a bit of sagging cloth. From behind it, a puppeteer crouches, unseen except for the occasional glimpse of his hands as he thrusts a puppet into view. One puppet wears a faded teal robe and a floppy hat, wobbling its head dramatically, while the other, a squat figure in russet with a carved grimace, brandishes a tiny stick. Their dialogue is crude, funny, and filled with slapstick violence. The puppets shout insults, hit each other, and tumble about in ways no respectable knight would dare in public. The children in the audience shriek with laughter, pointing and clapping as the stick comes down again and again. Adults laugh too, though theirs is a knowing laughter, at the sly jokes tucked into the script. A line about a lazy lord here, a jab at corrupt priests there. The puppets, you realize, aren't just playthings. They're weapons of satire. The puppeteer risks ridicule himself, but by hiding behind his carved wooden characters, he can say things that no peasant would dare voice openly. And sometimes the jokes are so sharp, they draw a nervous glance toward the nearest guard. Here's the twist historians love to point out. Puppet shows weren't just for children. They were vehicles of political commentary, smuggled critique, and downright gossip disguised as comedy. Chroniclers mentioned clerics denouncing them as sinful distractions, but they persisted anyway, because who can resist the absurd sight of two painted dolls fighting like drunks at a tavern? Archaeologists even find fragments of carved wooden puppets in old villages, their paint faded, but their grins still intact. Scholars still debate whether these shows were innocent fun or dangerous subversion, but perhaps that was exactly their magic, a performance that could be both. The drum beats, the crowd roars, and a puppet tumbles headfirst off the stage to be scooped up by a giggling child. The puppeteer snatches it back, waves it about in mock indignation, and the laughter doubles. For a few moments, everyone forgets their hunger, their debts, their duties. All that matters is whether the teal-robed fool will survive the next swing of the stick. You lean against a wall, smiling despite yourself, realizing that in a world of swords and sermons, the humblest entertainment, a couple of wooden figures bickering on a plank stage, might be the most revolutionary of all. The dice might gamble with fortune, but here, the puppets gamble with truth wrapped in laughter. And the crowd, caught up in the silly magic, lets out a cheer that feels strangely timeless. The laughter from the puppet show fades, but your steps carry you into a space alive with an entirely different kind of rhythm, one that thrums in your chest and makes your feet itch to move. At first it sounds like chaos, a pounding drum, a screeching fiddle, a whistle shrilling sharp notes above the clamor. But then your ears sort it out, the strange hypnotic pulse of medieval dance music, the kind that turns a dusty courtyard into a carnival ground. A group of musicians has set up on a makeshift platform, their instruments as mismatched as their clothes. One fellow in a saffron tunic saws away at a rebec, a primitive cousin of the violin, while another beats a goatskin drum with calloused palms. A third, wearing indigo hose that have definitely seen better days, puffs his cheeks furiously at a bagpipe, the sound both ridiculous and compelling, like a goose arguing with itself. And above it all, a wiry man in a teal cap plays a pipe and tabor simultaneously, one hand tapping out a rhythm on a tiny drum strapped to his arm, while the other works the pipe. Multitasking at its finest, centuries before smartphones demanded it, The crowd can't resist. Children dart into the open space, their shoes slapping against the packed earth as they hop and twirl. A circle of peasants forms, joining hands and stomping in time with the drum, their movements rough but joyous. Even a few better-dressed townsfolk edge closer, pretending not to notice their hems brushing the mud as they sway to the beat. It's loud, it's messy, it smells faintly of sweat and spilled ale, but it's also infectious. You can't help tapping your foot along, feeling your own body tug toward the center. Here's the quirky detail historians love. Many medieval dances were less about grace and more about endurance. Some went on for hours, even days, with dancers collapsing in heaps while others took their place. Chroniclers describe entire villages caught in a kind of dance fever, their movements so wild that clerics declared it the work of the devil. The so-called dancing plagues might have been mass hysteria, or rye bread poisoning, or simply people desperate to lose themselves in rhythm. Scholars still argue about it, but all agree. Dancing wasn't just fun, it was a strange, almost spiritual release. Back in the courtyard, the dance picks up speed. Someone claps on the offbeat. A jester flips into the circle and nearly collides with a goose, and the crowd howls with laughter. Sweat shines on the fiddler's brow. The bagpipe wheezes dangerously, but the music keeps rolling. You picture modern clubs with their laser lights and DJs, and realize people haven't changed all that much. They've always craved a beat strong enough to drown out their worries. You linger at the edge, letting the rhythm carry you like a tide. For a moment, you're part of a pulsing, living organism made of stomping feet and clapping hands. And as the drum thunders again, you understand, this isn't just entertainment. This is community stitched together in rhythm, a reminder that joy can be as powerful as any fortress wall. The pounding of the drums and the squeal of the bagpipes eventually fade behind you, but your ears aren't left in silence for long. Instead, a strange sing-song chanting drifts through the air, punctuated by sudden bursts of laughter and groans of disbelief. You follow it, weaving past the last of the dancers, and soon find yourself at the edge of a crowd gathered around a raised wooden platform. Here, the entertainment is less about music and more about words, riddles, storytelling, and jokes that bind people together as surely as any tune. A man in a russet cloak stands proudly at the center, holding nothing more than a carved wooden staff. His face is lined, his beard graying, but his eyes gleam like he knows secrets no one else dares to say out loud. He's a riddler, a jongleur of words tossing out puzzles in a sing-song rhythm. What has roots that nobody sees yet is taller than trees? He asks, and the children squeal the wrong answers while the adults smirk, arms crossed. The prize for the right guess is a dried apple from his pouch, but the true reward is the laughter, when someone blurts out something ridiculous. But he doesn't stop at riddles. His tongue dances through bawdy jokes, the kind that skirt the edge of propriety, but still stay just safe enough to avoid scandal. He teases the local miller about how much grain he borrows for himself, and the crowd roars, especially because the miller's wife laughs the loudest. Humor here is communal. It's a way of poking fun at life's little injustices without tipping into rebellion. You catch yourself chuckling too, even though the punchline was probably used 100 times before the Black Death made its first appearance. And here's the odd historical twist. Medieval jokes weren't just entertainment, they were survival tools. Laughter could diffuse tensions, stitch communities back together, and make unbearable hardships just a little lighter. Monks, surprisingly, were some of the best collectors of jokes, scribbling them in the margins of manuscripts where they still confuse scholars today. Was Brother Anselm really meditating on scripture, or was he doodling a chicken and writing down a fart joke? The debate continues. The riddler pauses, wipes his brow, and then launches into a long tale, half history, half nonsense, about a knight who tried to outwit a goose and lost his trousers in the process. The crowd is in stitches, some doubled over, others wiping their eyes. You can't help but think of modern stand-up comedians, microphones in hand, spinning the absurdities of life into laughter. Only here the stage is muddy, the air smells of wood smoke and onions, and the jokes are a little rougher around the edges. You lean against the post of a nearby stall, letting the words wash over you and realize something. In a world filled with war, hunger and endless labor, laughter is as vital as bread. And here, under the twilight sky of a medieval town, laughter ripples outward like a shield against the darkness. The Riddler's laughter still echoes faintly as you wander away, but soon another sound pulls you along, a ragged chorus of voices, broken and uneven, yet oddly magnetic. You follow the trail to the edge of a long wooden hall, where smoke curls up from the rafters, and inside a different kind of entertainment is in full swing. Here the pastime is drinking games, and the players are in no mood for subtlety. The benches are crowded with men and women clutching earthenware mugs, their cheeks flushed crimson from ale and mead. A barrel has been rolled onto its side, and two burly fellows in teal tunics are balancing on top of it, daring each other to stay upright while the crowd chants and claps in rhythm. Every fall earns a roar of laughter, and of course another round to swallow. You hear one of them slur a toast about St. Lawrence blessing his liver, and even the local priest chuckles from the corner, pretending he's only here to supervise. The rules of the games are simple. Drink when you lose, drink when you win, drink when someone else sneezes. The details barely matter. The point is to see who lasts the longest before collapsing under the table. There's a woman in a saffron dress who seems unbeatable, raising her mug with one hand, while juggling hazelnuts with the other, and the men are howling at their own humiliation. Someone attempts to sing a hymn but forgets half the words, so the tune mutates into a bawdy parody that has the entire hall shaking with laughter. And here's the curious fact. Medieval people trusted ale far more than water. Streams could be contaminated, but beer brewed weak for daily use was a safe staple. Drinking games weren't just for merriment. They were tangled into the rhythms of life, where liquid bread fueled both peasants and nobles. Historians still argue whether these contests were harmless fun or a form of social pressure, ensuring no one strayed too far from the communal bowl. You sip from a mug pressed into your hand. The taste sour but comforting, and feel the warmth creep down your throat. The room blurs a little at the edges, and the sounds of laughter, clapping, and clattering mugs swirl together into a single boisterous hum. It's messy, reckless, and utterly human. In a world shadowed by war and famine, the ability to laugh at one another's wobbling balance and exaggerated toasts is perhaps the truest proof of resilience. And as you watch another barrel-top champion tumble into the straw, you realize some forms of entertainment haven't changed a bit. They just come with better hangover remedies now. The echoes of drunken cheers fade behind you as the night air clears your head, crisp and cool against your flushed cheeks. Yet the castle is rarely quiet for long. A sudden shrill chorus of barking draws you toward a courtyard where torches sputter and shadows dance. Here the entertainment takes on a much rowdier shape, the medieval pastime of animal baiting. You wince as you step closer, because the scene is both grotesque and captivating. A ring has been formed with crude wooden rails, and inside, a massive snarling bear is chained to an iron post. Its fur bristles, its jaws snap, and the crowd shrieks with delight. Packs of dogs, lean, muscled mastiffs with brass-studded collars, are released one after another, each charging the beast in a frenzy of barks and growls. The bear swipes, with a paw that could crush a skull, and sometimes it connects, sending a dog tumbling. The audience roars as though they're at a championship match, their faces illuminated by the erratic glow of torches. The air stinks of sweat, wet fur, and anticipation. Children are hoisted onto shoulders for a better view, though you silently wonder if their bedtime stories will ever be the same. Men bet on how many dogs it will take to wear the bear down. Women clutch their cloaks tight, some grimacing, others leaning forward with unblinking fascination. The atmosphere is a cocktail of horror and thrill, the kind of spectacle that would make modern sports fans look positively tame. And here's the disturbing truth. Baiting wasn't just about cruelty. It was tied to ideas of strength, virility, and even politics. A lord who could host such spectacles showed off his wealth and dominance, as maintaining bears and packs of trained dogs wasn't cheap. Historians still debate whether audiences genuinely enjoyed the gore or whether they attended out of duty, like watching the local equivalent of a grim Super Bowl. What's undeniable is that it was deeply ingrained in social life, an acceptable form of entertainment that blurred the line between celebration and savagery. You feel a pang of sympathy as one dog limps away, tail between its legs, while the bear, panting, sways on its chain, exhausted but still defiant. The crowd erupts when another mastiff is released, eager for another round. You back away slowly, unsettled yet unable to forget the energy of the spectacle. It's not joy you carry with you, but a sharper awareness. In the Middle Ages, entertainment could be a mirror of survival itself, raw, brutal, and leaving no one truly unscathed. You retreat from the racket of the baiting yard, but the echoes linger in your ears like the aftertaste of smoke. Just when you think you've seen every form of medieval madness, a new sound drifts to you, high, sharp, and strangely musical. It's not a lute, not a pipe, but the squawk of geese. You follow the noise, stepping into another courtyard where villagers and castle folk have gathered for one of the quirkiest games you'll ever witness: goose pulling. At the center of the square, a poor goose dangles upside down from a rope, stretched between two poles. Its feet are tied, its wings flapping wildly, and its furious honking fills the cold evening air. Riders on horseback take turns galloping past, each one trying to snatch the goose by the neck. The goal is simple and utterly bizarre. Whoever tears the goose free wins the prize, usually a small purse of coins or the goose itself, if it hasn't been too mangled in the process. The crowd cheers with unrestrained glee. Some laugh at the near misses when a rider's hand slips off the greasy neck. Yes, greasy, because to make it harder, the bird's feathers are often smeared with fat or soap. Others gasp when a horse skids dangerously close to the edge of the crowd. The game is part sport, part spectacle, and part chaos. You watch one young man nearly topple from his saddle, clinging desperately as the goose honks in what you swear sounds like outrage. Here's the unsettling fact. Goose pulling was so popular across Europe that entire towns made it a festival event, often tied to holidays. In some places it was played with a dead goose, sparing the live bird's suffering, though that hardly makes it less gruesome. Historians argue over whether it was simply a test of horsemanship or a ritual rooted in older fertility customs. Either way, it persisted for centuries, long enough to etch itself into both memory and folklore. You can't help but smirk at the absurdity. Imagine telling a modern audience, tonight's entertainment is horseback tug-of-war with a goose. They'd call it a reality show gone too far. And yet here the laughter is genuine, the thrill undeniable, the cruelty overlooked in favor of the rush. As the latest rider tears the goose free to a roar of approval, you step back, shaking your head in disbelief. In the strange theater of medieval joy, nothing seems too odd or too feathered to become a contest. You slip away from the goose feather chaos, the echoes of honking and cheers trailing after you like a bizarre dream. The air grows thicker with the smell of sweat, hay, and something sharp like onions and vinegar. And then you hear it, the roar of a crowd, rhythmic clapping, stomping boots, and the high-pitched sound of a fiddle scraping out a frantic tune. You've stumbled into another form of medieval revelry, one equal parts dance, theater, and a public workout, the village dancing competitions. In the center of a torchlit square, men and women fling themselves into dizzying circles, stamping their feet on the packed earth so hard the ground shakes. Their tunics are damp with sweat, their hair sticking to their flushed faces, but they grin like people possessed. The game isn't just about grace, it's endurance. Couples spin faster, arms linked, skirts and cloaks flying out like sails in the wind. Whoever lasts the longest without collapsing is declared the victor. And collapsing is not uncommon. You see one poor fellow stumble sideways into a bench, landing with a thud while his friends howl with laughter. The music never stops. Fiddlers, drummers, and pipers push the rhythm harder and harder, daring the dancers to keep up. The audience shouts encouragement, some tossing coins or scraps of food at the performers in mock reward. Children mimic the steps at the edges, turning the whole square into a buzzing hive of motion. For a moment, the castle doesn't feel like a fortress at all, but a giant, throbbing dance floor. Here's the historical twist. Dancing competitions weren't always innocent fun. Chroniclers wrote of dance manias where crowds would whirl for days, claiming they were cursed or driven by saints' visions. Some historians suggest ergot poisoning from moldy grain might have caused the delirium. Others argue it was social stress boiling over into movement. The debate still swirls. Was it sickness, spirituality, or simply the human desire to dance until your legs give out? You can't help but chuckle. This is medieval cardio at its most brutal. Forget the modern treadmill or spin class. Here you danced until you either won glory or passed out face first in the dirt. The fiddler screeches one last triumphant note, and the final pair collapses together in a heap, laughing breathlessly. The crowd erupts, hoisting them up as champions. Though both look like they'd trade the honor for a cool drink of water and a good nap, you breathe in the sweaty, electric air and realize that in a world defined by war, hunger and rigid order, sometimes the greatest rebellion was simply to dance like no one was watching. Except, of course, the entire village. You drift away from the echo of stamping feet and fiddles, following the hush that falls after the frenzy of laughter and applause. The square empties, torches sputtering down to glowing embers, and the night wraps the castle in its cool, heavy cloak. Somewhere distant, an owl hoots. Somewhere closer, a dog shuffles and sighs against a wooden door. The last sounds of revelry have dissolved into the kind of silence that makes stone walls seem taller, shadows seem deeper, and your own breath sound almost too loud. This is the quiet after the carnival, the stillness that sneaks in when all the songs have been sung and all the ale drained. You can still see flashes of it, children who danced themselves to sleep being carried home, a fiddler cradling his battered instrument as though it were a relic, the faint scuff marks in the dirt where couples spun until their legs gave out. Entertainment in the Middle Ages was fleeting, a firework of sound and movement in a world that otherwise moved so slowly. Yet those moments stitched lives together, weaving laughter and absurdity into the very fabric of survival. And here's the final historical irony. What might look to us like quirky distractions, dancing in circles, throwing geese, juggling fire, laughing at costumed fools, were in their time the glue that held communities together. They were medicine for the spirit, rebellion against monotony, an antidote to the grind of labor and the looming threat of war. Historians debate whether these pastimes were pure escapism or subtle forms of protest. Maybe they were both. Maybe they were simply people like you, clinging to joy in any form they could find. The torches gutter out one by one until only moonlight remains, pale and thin over the Bailey stones. You feel the rhythm of the night soften, the weight of centuries pressing down but not unkindly. You can almost hear the whisper of old laughter riding the wind, as though the castle itself remembers the games, the music, the jokes told in smoky halls. Now, let the images fade. The fiddlers bow stills, the jugglers lower their torches, the hens settle back into straw nests. The great gates of the fortress hold steady against the dark, but inside the pulse slows to nothing more than the slow breathing of sleepers. You stand at the edge of it all, knowing the revels are over, and that silence is as much a companion as song. So close your eyes, let the echoes of geese, drums, and dancing shoes melt away. Imagine the softest hay under your head, the cool night air brushing across your face, the stars keeping their eternal watch above. The siege of the day has passed, and now there is only rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.